That's remarkable. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining in the celebration of Roy Lukes' life. My name is Mitch Levitt. I'm honored today to introduce to you many friends and relatives who would like to share personal thoughts and feelings that they have with reference to Roy. I'll direct your attention to the program that hopefully most of you have. We'll follow that. In addition to personal comments, we'll listen to a performance by a string quartet from the Peninsula Music Festival. We will see a clip from a recently produced video that involves Roy. And then we will close with the brass quintet plus percussion, again, musicians from the Peninsula Music Festival. Some of you know that after high school graduation, Roy played trumpet in a local dance band and also played with the Green Bay Packers Lumberjack Band. So the finale with the brass quintet is particularly meaningful. In the interest of time, my introductions will be very brief. I'd like to begin by introducing to you Reverend Phil Sweet, retired pastor from Hope Church in Sturgeon Bay. Many of you know him as a welcome guest speaker at our local Unitarian Universalist Fellowship.
For the sun and the dawn that we did not create, for the moon and the evening which we did not make, for food which we can plant but we cannot make grow, for friends and loved ones that we have not earned and cannot pay, for all the gifts that we have received within our being, of life and friendship and love that come from sources outside ourselves. We lift up our hearts in thanksgiving. In the Hebrew Scriptures, it says, we build on foundations we did not lay. We drink from wells we did not dig. We sit under the shade of trees we did not plant. And we warm ourselves by fires which did not start. And so, in this place, let us light a chalice of thanksgiving as we honor all those who have given their light to us. So we come here this afternoon to honor and to remember and to express our gratitude for a life that cannot be repeated. For a long time in the world, we had lived under the assumption that what was good for us was good for the world, and we have been mistaken. It is only by the contrast that we will be able to live here. That is, what is good for the world will be good for us. Which means that we have to get to know the world, and then our only response, of course, would be reverence and worship. We will not be able to continue to live here if we do not live here with humility. So in 1927, the Catholic theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote a little book called The Divine Milieu. And in it he says, every person in the course of his life must build, starting with the natural territory of his own self, a work, an opus, into which something enters from all the elements of the earth. He makes his own soul throughout his earthly days. And at the same time, he collaborates in a greater opus, which transcends his own individual life, which is the completion of the world. Now, he uses the word opus, which is also a term that we use for musical composition. We are all works of art. We are the designers of our own artistic life. This is the most important thing that we do in our lifetime, as opposed to making a living. And when we understand that, then we understand that we simply do not live here for ourselves alone, but we are part of a much larger picture. So you find what makes you come alive, and then you go and you do it. And what Mary Oliver says is, we all die, and too soon, do we not? So what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So Roy Lukes represented a shift in consciousness, not simply in the living of his life, but in ways of thinking and feeling. That deep within our core, we have to come to understand that we don't simply live on the earth, that we are, in fact, the earth. We are all made up of the same elements. We simply don't live here for ourselves alone, and we are connected deeply for everything that exists here. And we make meaning together. Roy planted seeds wherever he went. Like Johnny Appleseed, which happens to be his favorite grace, little seeds of the heart that nourished us and come to fruition in our own life. Generally, and this is a fundamental question, in a way, two questions. What is it that remains after the death of a loved one? What passes from one life to another? So we get lit. We're like tinder in our life, in a way, if you want to think of it that way. That gets lit by a flame or a spark from someone that we come across in our life. And all the people that we have admired and loved in our life, they are with us all of our own existence. They evoke through their wisdom and their courage our own wisdom and courage. They take us into the deeper depths of our life, encouraging us. They worry about us all the time. For those that we have loved, the deepest place where they exist is deep within our own memory and our own souls. So we owe gratitude that we can never be able adequately to express for all those who have passed their light to us. Death in itself is an event that's quite simple in the natural world. But in human life, it has indescribable significance. It factors in every element of our life and casts a mantle of significance over everything we do. And in fact, I would venture to say that it's only in the face of death that we come to understand what it means to be human. This is, in fact, our deepest teacher. So we say with the psalmist, "O God, teach us to number our days, that we apply our hearts unto wisdom." So we don't end up at the end of our life not having done those things that we yearned to do, not having done what we were summoned, what we were called to do. Not many years ago, many of you would remember, there was a little book written that indicated that all that we ever needed to learn in life, we had learned in kindergarten. The golden rule, politics, love, friendship, basic sanitation, ecology. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Put things back where you found them. Don't take things that don't belong to you. Clean up your own mess. Wash your hands before you eat. Flush. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Take a nap every afternoon. Warm cookies and milk are good for you. Make sure you're aware of all the wonder in the world. When you go out into the world, beware of traffic, hold hands and stick together. You remember the little seed in the styrofoam cup? The roots go down and the plant goes up and nobody knows why or how. We are all like that. Goldfish, gerbils, hamsters, white mice, and even the little plant in the styrofoam cup. They all die, and so do we. And remember maybe the first book that you ever really learned a lot from, the Dick and Jane book, and the biggest word of all in those books was look. Now I think surely those words were in Roy's psyche and in his bones from the moment he was conceived. In 1992, Olivia Traven died. She was a founding member of the Ridges Sanctuary, and she was a woman to contend with. Roy came to Olivia's memorial because she was a member of my church in Sturgeon Bay to speak. And you're going to think this is a rather funny memory, but I sat directly behind the pulpit when Roy was speaking. And he was ramrod straight, like he was a soldier at attention. And he had on a blue serge suit. Now, you would not ever come to me if you wanted to know anything about fashion. I couldn't tell you when blue serge suits were in style. And his pants were too short. He had high-water pants. Now, I know that when Roy and Charlotte met in 1971, she said about Roy, he had on his old army shirt with threads hanging from the sleeves, a hat that was all full of grease or some kind of stuff, and pants that were full of holes. I thought in 1992, and they were never varied, I said to myself as I was sitting in back of him at the church, here is a man whose priorities were in keeping with the divine. Norbert Bly said he was a walking ecological treasure, a self-effacing gem. Two little poems to end with. This is a little piece by Michael Podesta called Desert. If, as Herod, the biblical character, we fill our lives with things and again with things, if we consider ourselves so unimportant that we must fill every moment of our lives with action, when will we have time to make the long, slow journey across the desert as did the Magi? Or sit and watch the stars as did the shepherds? Or brood over the coming of the child as did Mary? For each of us there is a desert to travel, a star to discover, and a life to bring into fruition within ourselves. My work is loving the world, Mary Oliver said, and she speaks for Roy. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird. equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums. Here the clams deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still not half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. And so he took us on his journey, and so speak I of Roy Lukes.
Thank you, Phil. Bruce Abraham will speak to us next. He attended several of the Festival of Nature programs and shared Roy's interest in birds. He lives in Oshkosh and has a home in Northern Door. Bruce?
Good afternoon, everyone. First, to Charlotte and Roy's family members, please accept Dawn's and my sincere condolences in Roy's recent passing. He will be greatly missed. Charlotte, thank you for being there with Roy over the years and your efforts in assisting Roy through his health issues the past couple of years. Thank you also for sharing Roy with all of us here today and many, many others, children and adults, that got to know Roy in person or in print. We are so very grateful that we came to know you and Roy as we have, and to be here today offering this tribute to Roy's life, his legacy. On this beautiful day, celebrating the life of a man so loved by all of us here today, I would like to create a perspective to Roy's contributions as a naturalist, as well as his endearing manner of sharing his knowledge of our environment and educating us to our role in protecting and respecting the natural world around us. To begin, I offer my definition of a naturalist as a person that appreciates, respects, and studies the natural world around them, many times in a specific area or areas of interest. Furthermore, they collect data from their natural world experiences and observations and share their knowledge with others for the purpose of building a greater understanding and respect of our natural world. And with kudos to Roy, the use of photography is a real asset. Furthermore, there are some important traits for a naturalist. By no means these are all inclusive. One, as a youngster, shows an inquisitive nature and appreciation, if not solace, in the outdoor environment from the world around them. Two, college educated, many times with a connection to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Three, long association with an environmental organization in a leadership role. Four, noted author of articles and books on our natural world. And five, considered highly knowledgeable about the natural world. You'll see the connection to this as I go on. But this sounds a lot like Roy, yes? Yes, these are certainly attributes of Roy's remarkable life. Roy's early interest in the natural world around him began as a child in Kewanee, Wisconsin, as encouraged by his parents. Following receiving his undergrad degree from the State Teachers College in Oshkosh, he received his master's degree in Madison from UW-Madison in 1959. As I'm sure you all know, Roy's association with the Ridges and Bailey's Harbor for 26 years as manager and naturalist is highly noteworthy for his work and devotion to that organization that certainly helped solidify his reputation as a highly regarded naturalist. Additionally, Roy and Charlotte were founding members of the Friends of Toft Point, dedicated to protecting the flora and fauna of this unique Door County ecosystem. Of course, Roy's 3,000 plus and counting weekly articles in various Door County and local newspapers are etched in lore and cherished by many, too many people to count. Roy has also written 5 books, wonderful exposés of his beloved Door County. In addition, Roy, many times with Charlotte, has received numerous commendations for significant environmental contributions to Wisconsin. But guess what? We, the people of the state of Wisconsin, have been blessed with a select group of other highly recognized naturalists, such as Roy, that share similar backgrounds, to which I contend Roy is their equal. As I mentioned earlier, I wish to create a perspective to gauge Roy's significant contributions to Wisconsin's preservation of its environment. I therefore present two examples. First is John Muir, known as the father of our national park system in the U.S. Born in Scotland, Muir's family immigrated to the U.S., Portage, Wisconsin, when John was 11 years old. Muir was brought up in a strict family and found refuge in the outdoors and his own inventions. He attended UW-Madison, paying his own tuition, but eventually left school to pursue studying botany and the natural world on his own. He founded the Sierra Club in 1892 and was president of this environmental organization for many years. Muir wrote many articles and several books during his life and received numerous acclamations in recognition for his work. A notable quote I'd like to share of Muir's reminds me of similar messages that Roy has written at times in his articles. In every walk with nature, one receives far more than he seeks. Second, Aldo Leopold, known as the father of wildlife management. Born in Iowa, he was brought up in a well-to-do family and developed his interest in the outdoors from his father, who took interest in getting his children outdoors into the woods. A graduate of Yale, he took residence in Wisconsin at age 37 when he became associate director for the U.S. Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, that eventually led to a professorship of game management at UW-Madison. In 1935, Leopold founded the Wilderness Society and is credited with writing 300-plus articles and several books, most notably a Sand County Almanac that articulated the concept of a land ethic. Leopold has also been recognized for his numerous contributions for our environment. A famous quote of Leopold's from a Sand County Almanac strikes right at the heart of Roy's life's work. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. Of course, there are more examples of noteworthy naturalists that Roy's contributions are comparable to, but I choose two to make the point. However, each of these biographical highlights, Lukes, Muir, and Leopold, are just thumbnail overviews of these men's accomplishments. There is considerably more for each of them. Nonetheless, it must be acknowledged the distinct similarities among these three naturalists with strong Wisconsin ties. The portfolio of environmental writings during their lives, the actions they undertook to lead and enlist others to preserve our environment, and their examples of the importance in understanding, respecting, and experiencing our natural world. Always. Yes, Muir, Leopold, Lukes, true conservation icons. The way in which Roy communicated with people in his writings or in person, in presentations, hikes, and discussions was so powerful. Powerful not necessarily in his delivery of a message, but with the simplicity and inquisitive manner that allowed the listener to understand the message and at the same time formulate a question or two to further their understanding and tap into Roy's knowledge. During these moments, Roy, the teacher, is there with this smile of wonderment on his face, just loving to see and hear people open up to the natural world around them. Finally, I would like to propose, and will participate as needed, to nominate Roy to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, which would place Roy with his counterparts in environmental stewardship, such as John Muir and Aldo Leopold, as well as many of his contemporaries, among them Roy's cousin C.D. Buzz Bezedny. However, on second thought, it would be most appropriate to nominate both Roy and Charlotte Lukes together as Frederick and Frances Hammerstrom were in 1996. This would be consistent in the recognition of the joint body of work that Roy and Charlotte both participated in together over the years. Both are very deserving. So in conclusion, the challenge for all of us is to carry on Roy's legacy in educating ourselves as well as others in the respect and preservation of our natural world. Roy would be most proud of that. I leave you with these words of Roy's from his book, Once Around the Sun, a Door County Journal, published in 1976. All of us who are interested in the natural environment are faced with the same responsibilities. We must learn about the world around us and take care of it. It is as simple as that. And perhaps we can even improve small portions of it for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Francia Barnard is a dear friend who lives in Bailey's Harbor. She also is a poet and will share something with us now.
I know. Hi, Charlotte. I'm offering a few words in the form of a poem today, but first I'd like to invite you to take a minute to remember the sound of Roy's voice. Maybe on a hike, maybe giving a talk along with his gorgeous slides, maybe at your dinner table. If you close your eyes, you might just hear him. Roy's voice. You know, if you're a teacher, and Roy always was, voice matters. You learn if you're good, and Roy always was, to modulate, to pause. Roy knew you didn't shout about the natural world. You listened, watched, smelled it. You needed to be in it, both teacher and student, before you could speak about it. This is what reverberates amid recent conversations, columns, and speeches of praise. That gentle voice of Roy's, like cream in coffee, its soft undertone and sometimes the hint of humor given away when you saw him slyly smiling. Never aspiring to comparison with velvet, Roy's voice was more corduroy, wide whale corduroy, rubbed smooth with the nap. The birds at dawn, the birds Roy loved, were louder than he. Now Roy leaves us with a quiet challenge, to speak with his voice, to keep telling his stories, to teach what he taught us.
Thank you, Francia. Don Bartoli is a good friend and an avid mushroom hunter. Many of you realize that was something that Roy was fond of too. Well, actually, in Charlotte as well, so thank you, Don.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Don Bartoli, and I am honored to share my remembrances about Roy Lukes with you today. The first time I met Roy, I was attending Charlotte's mushroom class at the clearing. Charlotte told the class that Roy was going to join us midweek during a hike at the Meridian Rest Area Trail. The class was eagerly excited to meet the legend. When Roy arrived, my first impressions were his tilted cap, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, his walking stick, his humble smile, the twinkle in his eyes, and his soft-spoken voice. We were actually in the presence of the legend, and we were in his element. The following year, my wife Beth and I attended the Wonders of Non-Flowering Plants, led by Charlotte and Roy, at Bjork, London. It was simply another wonderful week in the woods. From then on, our friendship with Roy and Charlotte steadily grew. We had the privilege of sharing several memorable excursions to Washington Island and Rock Island with Roy and Charlotte. Our first excursion to Rock Island was supposed to be for Roy and a search for big trees. However, it quickly turned into a quest for mushrooms, as there were rains earlier in the week and the fungus was among us. As I recall, Charlotte identified over 40 species that day, adding to her list of Rock Island mushrooms, and maybe even a new species or two for her Door County list. We never did make it to the area of the big trees that day. Sorry about that, Roy. Another time when we went to Rock Island, it rained on the way over on the Carfee. It was one of those long rides in the wind, rain, and surf where the Carfee took the long way to the Rock Island boathouse. Almost immediately after arrival, the rain stopped, the sun came out, and it was absolutely a magical day for fungus. It was as if we could see them growing before our very eyes. Again, Charlotte added new finds to her Rock Island list. And this time, we made sure to get to the big hemlock so Roy could measure it and take pictures. Our final trip with Roy to Rock Island was last September. As Roy was slowing down, the park rangers graciously arranged for us to use a gator so Roy could get around more comfortably. I recall that we spotted a garter snake that had just grabbed hold of a good-sized toad and began the process of devouring it. There was Roy taking pictures as the snake slowly swallowed lunch. As our friendship grew with Roy and Charlotte, there were many interesting things I learned about Roy. He often spoke of his Czech heritage, and that his name is pronounced Lukes in the old country. I learned that the Czech word for mushrooms is hobby. He also shared a family recipe for Bohemian rye bread, made with flour from the Kewanee Co-op. It was delicious. I learned that he was a trumpet player, and that he played in jazz combos in his younger days. He also played in the Packer Pep Band. He told a story about one game against the Bears in Chicago. Apparently, the Packer Band was not very welcome in Bear Country that day because the band was arranged in a single vertical column with one musician per row. Can't you just picture that? I also learned that Roy served in the U.S. Army in an artillery unit. I want to acknowledge Roy's service to his country, as well as the hearing loss he suffered as a result of his service. Roy, I salute you. Whenever Roy was in the woods, he always showed a sense of wonder for everything in nature. As we all know, he possessed an awesome wealth of knowledge, which he truly liked to share with others, including children, whom he saw as nature's stewards of the future. I saw this firsthand with our family. He really seemed to enjoy engaging our grandson. Throughout the hike, Roy's gentle way of interacting with the youngster really drew him in to being part of the experience. Charlotte, whenever Beth and I would spend time with you and Roy, we would always wonder, what did we ever do to be blessed with their friendship? In closing, Roy Lukes has made a lasting impression in the lives of countless others. His legacy of respect, love, and awe of nature will live on in all of us. For me personally, Roy enriched my love of the outdoors by giving me a broader and deeper understanding of things that I would have otherwise never noticed or simply walked by. Roy, I especially want to thank you for mentoring Beth and for being instrumental as she achieved her dream of becoming a naturalist at Newport. I know she will continue to make you proud as she shares your teachings and your love for nature with others. I'd like to close with my personalized rendition of the Johnny Appleseed Blessing. It's a song Roy and Charlotte introduced us to around their dinner table. Roy, please reach down and hold our hands as I sing with you one more time. Oh, the Lord's been good to me, and so I thank the Lord for giving me the hikes with Roy in the woods on a quest for the biggest tree. The Lord's been good to me. Amen, 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 amen.
Thank you, Don. Joel Blahniks and Roy's families were friends many years ago in Kewanee. Joel is an accomplished musician, composer, and music teacher.
Dobry den, dámy a pánové. Vítajte tady. This is a greeting to you. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this beautiful auditorium. The air conditioning feels great, doesn't it? I remember well when this auditorium went up. It was because I was teaching here at the time, and I gave the first public performance on the stage, and it was a great thrill. It was a dream that was fostered for about 5 or 6 years, and it finally came to fulfillment. Okay, the language that Roy Lukes heard as a youngster in his native Kewanee was something that I spoke just a minute ago. And everybody, as they walked down the street, would say, Dobry den, to each other, good day. And that was very common in the old country, and it was very common in Kewanee. So, Roy was raised in this environment. Another language that was Roy's was the language of music, which we shared together. If Roy told me once, he told me 7 or 8 times that when he was a youngster, he would sit on his family home porch on Sunday afternoons and listen to my great-grandfather's band rehearse at my grandfather's house, which was just 3 houses down the street on Wisconsin Avenue in Kewanee. It was a big thrill for him. He found it very inspirational. The Blahnik Brass Band was a 3-generational ensemble of all Blahnik musicians, with 90% of the repertoire composed by my great-grandfather, who was an immigrant and settled in the area of Carleton, just south of Kewanee. The ensemble was composed by his sons and nephews, including my father, who came to be the first permanent music director at Gibraltar High School here in 1935. He taught band, choir, and orchestra, and making 25 violins for his students. His additional assignments were teaching music to the outlying village schools, as well as driving school bus, teaching math at the high school, and supervising a study hall. Whew, that's a big load. In spite of this heavy load, Dad had a very successful program, and some of his students, many of them from the Baptist Church in Sister Bay, are still playing and singing to this day. One of his guest conductors was Dr. Frederick Stock, who was the conductor of the Chicago Symphony and who had a summer home on the bluff near Little Sister Bay. It was in Kewanee where Roy and my father met. Roy, being a gifted musician, began playing professionally on trumpet, actually it was a cornet, during his Kewanee high school tenure. During this time, Roy was fascinated also with the Blahnik Girls Brass Band, who charmed the passengers and the freight wagons as the Ann Arbor car ferry unloaded its cargo in the Kewanee Harbor. The Gals, which consisted of 50% membership with the surname of Blahnik, were dolled up in nautical dress, and my father was their musical coach. They also performed music which was written by my great-grandfather. Roy enjoyed their performances, for he knew every gal by name, and my great-aunt Myrtle, who is now 100 years young, told me this last spring that occasionally the girls' band had to call Roy to sit in if one of the trumpeters could not make the gig. So Roy properly donned the dress and a wig to fit in with the rest of the girls. What a rascal. Okay. My father and Roy later collaborated in the 1940s when they both played with the Green Bay Packer Band, which was echoed here just previously. Myself, I came to Gibraltar as a fourth-generation Blahnik musician in the role of instrumental music instructor in 1980, and it was at this time that I met Roy and Charlotte, who attended some of my school performances and also the concerts of the Czech folk ensembles who toured America, or tours that I would arrange, and I would get Roy and Charlotte to be a member of this folk ensemble by playing either the rake, the old wooden rake, or the stump fiddle. And they were both really good sports and had great fun in improvising with fellow Czechs from Europe. Roy and I would exchange CDs, tapes, and stories. In his profession as a naturalist, I worked with Roy and his ensembles on Chambers Island, whose lighthouse has been a summer responsibility of my own family for the last 42 years. Roy's enthusiasm was superb as he hosted the Wisconsin State Ornithology Organization and then take concern and measure some of the trees which were virgin white pine, which had fantastic growth and an amazing width to them. And he really enjoyed that time on the island. That escapade probably took about 5 years ago. In 1993, I retired here from Gibraltar and began a music career as a music festival judge and clinician, of which I have done about 850 festivals worldwide, and also continued on a path of publishing music with my company, API, which from an inventory of about 3,200 works, over 600 of them flowed from my pen. API is internationally regarded as the second largest Czech music publisher in the world, which was not our primary focus. Our first priority was educational music, and then music by women composers, and then thirdly, the Czechoslovak music, of which we host 96 Czech composers and also 52 Wisconsin composers. At this point, I would like to make an analogy. What is the comparison of Roy Lukes and the Czech composer Antonín Dvořák? In many ways, they have the same soul, the same awe of nature, and the same reverence and respect for beauty. Roy worked his life as a naturalist and loving teaching. Dvorak was a romantic nationalist composer, writing many works on the theme of nature. In 1893, when Dvorak had a summer residency in Spillville, Iowa, his daily routine was to play the organ at daily Mass at 6 o'clock in the morning, and after Mass, he'd take a daily hike in the surrounding area, contemplating musical ideas with his observation of nature. He'd then return home for breakfast and compose until about 4:30, and then play a hand or two of cards with local townsmen, have a beer, and then eat supper at 6 p.m. and enjoy his family life then until the bed hour. That sense of routine was fruitful and productive for Dvorak. Roy and Charlotte had a very cooperative routine, and from looking at the many books, articles, photography, and all sorts of nature escapades that they shared together, they were a fabulous duet. With you today, I wish to share my musical setting of the Largo movement of Antonin Dvorak from the New World Symphony. I took this original setting for symphony orchestra and adapted it for a vocal boys choir from the Czech Republic. And they sang it with perfect intonation and interpretation, just as I had conceived it. And they sang it in English. Czech boys from the age of about 6 to 15. They've recorded it on 3 different CDs and have sung it at over 600 performances. The closest one here to Fish Creek was in Sturgeon Bay a few years ago. Hence, both Roy Lukes and Antonin Dvorak were of the same essence. I wish to illustrate this point to take the Dvorak theme, which is pentatonic, which is an inspiration to Dvorak for this scale of 5 tones, which you can see basically are the black keys on the piano keyboard, is very common to many of the different Native American tribes, as well as African tribes. Okay? Pentatonic, 5-note theme. Ya, dee, 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 da, da, and so on, okay? I would like to play for you now the setting, and I think Kurt has it on a recording that I sent to him. And I would like to have, imagine now, as you hear the first 5 measures in the introduction, that you are on a nature hike with Roy. And then you're going to go on a journey. Roy, this music by youthful boys reflect your love and compassion for all what is beautiful in life. Spana Bohem, mój czeski brater, Salaska.
Thank you, Joel. Warren Bloom worked publishing many of Roy's NatureWise articles for several years at the Door County Advocate.
During my first go-round as the editor of the Door County Advocate, I had the privilege of seeing Roy Lukes' columns before the rest of you for 5 years. Editing Roy was one of my easiest tasks. His copy was clean. I always suspected Charlotte had a lot to do with that. And I always learned something about nature or about Door County, and usually about both. He inspired me and he taught me. Sometimes on the most practical levels, there's the time I was a little careless in clearing some brush on my property in a t-shirt and shorts. And for the next several weeks, I was plagued by this rash on my arms and legs. And they just would not respond to ointments or creams or any of that stuff. Then one week, Roy just happened to be writing about something called wild parsnips. You know. And it's got an unpleasant rash that thrives in sunlight. And he wrote in the column that all you need to do is wear long sleeves and long pants for a while, and it'll go away. And sure enough, Roy Lukes to the rescue. Roy was an advocate of nature and an advocate of Door County, and I'd say in his lifetime he raised a whole army of advocates. And his joy was in the details. He saw the grandeur of the natural beauty of Door County, but he also saw the grandeur in the details. See this bird and how it lives among us. Look at this incredible mushroom. Fear for this butterfly. Over the second half of the 20th century, there was a whole generation of poets among us in Door County who helped shape how we think and feel about ourselves and about this, our home. Roy Lukes is one of those poets. I don't say Roy was one of those poets because his words live on to inspire us, and those of us who have been touched by his words will carry on his words, his work. He inspired us and he taught us. He showed us how to live a meaningful life. Roy Lukes' life meant something. May we all aspire to have such meaning.
Thank you, Warren. Cindy Byers worked with Roy as a naturalist many years ago at the Ridges. She currently teaches at in Rosholt, Wisconsin.
Good afternoon. My husband and I met Roy in 1985 after we had just finished up some degrees at UWSP in the College of Natural Resources. And I worked with Roy as a naturalist at the Ridges in the summers of 1986, 87, 88, and 89. Roy has been a dear friend and a mentor of mine for most of my life. He's also been a lifelong friend and a loving influence to our 2 children. After my last visit with Roy, just a few days before his passing, I wrote a letter to him that Charlotte asked me to read to you today. Dear Roy, it was wonderful to see you yesterday. I am very sad that you're sick, but I must say that it did my heart good to see the twinkle in your eyes and see that smile on that amazing face of yours. I think of you often and our times together. I don't know if you realize what an influence you have had on my life. I am who I am today because of time spent with you. The spirit with which you approach each day and the way that you see the world around you help me to see the world in a more beautiful way. I drive to work each day with a nature lover, and we marvel at the colors of the sky and the daily changes around us. We talk about birds we have seen and how the changes of the season touches our hearts. I often think and speak of you during these conversations and I'm delighted with the thoughts of our walks and conversations together. I also must say that every spring, as I see the cherry and serviceberry trees in blossom, I recall driving around with you in Door County visiting schools. It is one of my fondest memories. I cherished this time we had to talk and watch the coming of summer together. Now every spring, when I see the white blossoms struggling to peek through, I think of you and always will. I love you, Roy. I love our friendship, and I will miss you when you are gone from this life. But I will see you in the white blossoms and the dragonflies. I will hear you in the call of the warblers and the gentle lapping of the water on the warm summer sand. Forever your friend, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy. Tom Erdman manages the Richter Natural History Museum in the Coffin Biodiversity Center at UW Green Bay. He learned to band birds from Roy and continues that activity still.
I'm doing double duty here today. I also have some information from the Crawford Center of Biodiversity at UW Green Bay. Many of my colleagues would like to have been here today, but unfortunately many of them are traveling. Dr. Howell, the director, right now is on his way to Ecuador, but he provided me with some information about how the Crawford Center is going to tribute Roy Lukes in several ways. Roy was a great friend to our program in general, and to many of us, he was also a beloved personal friend. On behalf of all the students, staff, and others at UW Green Bay, who he has influenced so positively, both directly and indirectly, we would like to commemorate his life with two lasting memorials. First, we will designate a beautiful and serene trail segment near the quarry at Toff Point in his honor. This was one of Roy's favorite places, rich in both botany and history. With Charlotte's help, we will chart the Roy Lukes Trail and formally dedicate it in a future ceremony. Second, the Crawford Center, we will create a student research award entitled the Roy Lukes Natural History Research Award, which will provide funding for students to conduct research on any topic involving natural history in northeastern Wisconsin. More than 150 UW students have carried out natural history research projects since 1988, many of them funded by a student research endowment established by the Coffrin family. This new award would expand the opportunities for students, and I would point out this is for undergraduate students and graduate students. Many of these students, this is the first time that they get to go out in the real world and do something. Most students, there will certainly be a highly desired and productive award. Roy's name will forever be attached to this opportunity, which will help shape the careers of future scientists and conservation advocates. We will initiate the award with all our donations, and also invite others if they were willing to contribute to the endowment. So those are the two things looking forward, honoring Roy. My personal story with Roy goes back over 50 years. I was probably at the ridges perhaps before Roy was. Unfortunately, my life was not easy early on. My father died when I was 13. We were in sort of difficult straits. I had a tremendous interest in natural history, and my natural history was a double-stall concrete driveway and a public library card. And actually, through the library card, I found out about the Green Bay Bird Club, Dr. Joe Hickey's book from Madison. And I was taken under wing by two naturalists, Clara Hassong and Ray Hassong. Some of you who are older might remember her. And they carted me around, took me places, and Clara and Ray both loved the ridges. Many of her columns, she wrote for the Press Gazette for 41 years. And many of her columns were related to the ridges. The Green Bay Bird Club made an annual summer field trip to the ridges. Very often, at least the first time I was there, it was hosted by Merle Dusing, who lived across from the ridges. His home later, Virginia Booth acquired. And I was actually amazed more by him and what he was doing at that time than the ridges. Perhaps many of you people don't realize he was a cinematographer, fantastic wildlife photographer. He worked for Walt Disney, among other things. He also, later on, started one of the first public TV programs on wildlife. But when he was up here, part of his home were full of cases. And you suddenly learned in the Walt Disney movies, The Vanishing Prairie, The Living Desert, there were some beautiful scenes. Those were shot in Bailey's Harbor, in the South Boreal Forest. The magic of photography. But anyway, I first met Roy in about 64, 65. I was sophomore in high school. And we were chasing birds. We had a tremendous evening grosbeak invasion. And I and some of my friends went to see evening grosbeaks, and we learned that somebody was coming to help band, or was coming to band the birds. And eventually, this is how I met Roy Lukes. He invited me up to the ridges, and this was after I turned 16 and was able to drive. And I spent probably 3-4 years, as many weekends as I could, a lot of days in the summer. He was just starting at the ridges. There was a lot of work. The lighthouse residents needed a lot of work. There were a lot of bridges. There was a lot of boardwalks that needed repair, and I apologize to all of those that followed me in the 70s and the 80s, because in the 60s, that was low water, record low on the Great Lakes. And the boardwalks and things were built that way. As the water came up, the people that followed me had to raise all of those things and have fun. That was, that's part of the story. You learn as you go. But he was a great mentor. He was a great teacher to me. I should also point out he was probably also a guidance counselor. A lot of things could have gone strange in my life back then, and I didn't, mainly because of a good friend. In the 60s, and besides the work, we had a lot of fun. We explored Door County. We went looking for fossils. We went Hines Creek and the sand blows in the spring looking for Indian artifacts. He took me down and showed me the dunes by Whitefish Bay. He introduced me to wonderful people. Emma Toft, going out on Toft's Point in her wisdom. Harold Wilson from Ephraim, a bird bander, a dean of bird banders in the state of Wisconsin. He introduced me to Jack, Hat Island, the sisters, and got me into studying colonial birds. There was another bander from Davenport, Iowa, Pete Peterson. He was a curator of Natural History Museum down there. And I remember one weekend, Roy says, I have tours, go with him. All right. Go up by Europe Lake, wander through this aimless road in the woods, get out to the shoreline, throw canoes in, canoe out to Spider Island Reef to band terns and gulls and shorebirds. You would know that place today by Newport State Park. Unfortunately, when the high water came, that reef got completely taken off and all the birds moved. The place where the dunes is, that is now Newport State Park. Toft Point is a natural area. Later on, in about 66, 67, Roy and I got permission to band birds down on Point Sabo on Green Bay. This was owned by two fellows. One was a lawyer, one was a banker. But although they used it for duck hunting, they wanted to preserve it. So they allowed us to band. And we spent 3 years, 4 years there, having a lot of fun, learning a lot of things. And today, that too is part of the natural areas for the Coffin Center of Biodiversity. Toff Point and Point Sabo, and we have others. We had a lot of experiences and adventures. Unfortunately, none of them were serious or got us in much trouble. There is one that Roy would never let me forget, and it was December 31st, 1967. Does that ring a bell with anyone? That was an infamous day known as the Ice Bowl. And the Green Bay Packers played the Dallas Cowboys. And it was 15 to 18 below, wind chill of about 41 below. And the people in the stadium were suffering. Well, unfortunately, Roy came down and I made him suffer. We were out on the ice on the bay trying to trap snowy owls. We weren't very successful, but the Packers were. And so I guess all things turned out well. But for a Packer lover, that must have hurt. One thing about Roy and all the years that we've been together, he got me started in bird banding. And in this state, well, even in today's world, if you can have the federal permits and the state permits, it means you can go out and do research. You can start studying something. One of the things that Roy and others I have known have taught me that, all right, if you're interested in something, whether it be a plant or an insect or a bird or something like this, go out and do it. Start doing it on your own, taking notes, taking photographs, whatever. If you're going to wait around for somebody to give you a research grant or give you money to go study something, it's never going to get done. You either have the interest to go after it and do it and the persistence, or it's not going to happen. One of the things that Roy really had was patience and persistence. He was a wonderful teacher. But if you take a look at what the size of the ridges was when he started and the decades of work it took, parcel by parcel by parcel, to expand it and grow it, and then the addition of Toff Point, Lighthouse Point, Mud Lake Wildlife Area, the whole thing, I mean, that takes decades of work. And it takes a lot of not only work, but stopping development. We can look at a lot of the things that were done in Door County and be very pleased with ourselves. But if you've been around here for a long time, you go through places, you see things, and you're sad for the things that you didn't save, you didn't preserve. And I have a lot of fun. I do a lot of work on the Nicolet National Forest, and I've been privileged to be able to save some things up there. Also, over time, Roy gave me the honor of coming back and speaking at some of those weekly nature programs at the Bailey's Harbor Town Hall, where it wasn't air conditioned like this, but it was a great experience. He's been a longtime friend to the university, to the Coffin Center. Even in recent years, in his frequent trips to Green Bay with Charlotte, they would stop at the museum, the Gary Felis Museum, Herbarium, I should say, at the university, in the Richter Museum, stop and chat, catch up on what was happening up in Door County, what's going on down here, what's new. Roy's mind, to the end, was like a sponge. He never lost his curiosity, and he never lost his interest in communicating and sharing what he knew. I'm going to miss him a great deal. You've all heard the adage, friends come, friends go, enemies just accumulate. All right. Or in some cases, enemies could last you a lifetime, a good enemy. I can attest and testify that a good friend can last you a lifetime. And Roy was a good friend, and he's left us with a legacy and a responsibility to honor it.
And now a string quartet from the Peninsula Music Festival will perform the Lento Movement from the American Quartet by Dvorak. Thank you. Dale Goodner's family owned a cottage on land that is now Whitefish Dunes State Park. His career has included environmental writing as a naturalist. Dale states that he recalls attending Roy's nature tours at the ridges when he was a child.
Tough act to follow. Back in the late 1960s, I was taking ecology from a fellow named Keith White at UWGB. Maybe some of you know him. Keith was a wonderful teacher, excellent fellow. He recommended that I go to a place called the Ridges, and so I did. And I got to tag along with Roy on a number of hikes. What I really appreciated about Roy was his incredible enthusiasm toward spotted coral root or ram's head lady slipper, many of which I had never heard of. He did a program, an indoor program, where he recorded a wood thrush on one of those reel-to-reel tape recorders. The song of the wood thrush, for those of you familiar, it's amazing. It's what some of the natives used to call spirit song. Roy rewound it. Then he played it back very slowly. And you could hear that bird's voice. It was like two flutes harmonizing. I was floored. That was the kind of thing that Roy was able to do, to relate something, to give you a new perspective, not just a new plant or a new bird. I think about that every time today when I'm hiking at, you know, where the Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal Nature Preserve is. Walk through there in June.
you'll hear that wood thrush and the hermit thrush. I think of Roy every time I go there and hear that. Birds tell you who they are. That was another thing that Roy taught. There are little tricks of learning some of the bird calls. If you hear somebody say chickadee-dee-dee, what's the bird? How about old sweet Canada, Canada, Canada? White-throat sparrow. Roy taught us that language. I'm very grateful. He made connections. His enthusiasm was contagious. He could relate to your personal experience, but he also took information and did something special. He would give you a revelation based on information, not just the information. Somebody could have showed me how to identify reedgrass, but Roy said, this is the plant that grew in a very thick manner, and this is the plant in which Moses was hidden from the Pharaoh in that little basket. I mean, think about that. This plant, you know, when you see those kind of stories, it makes a revelation. And then the thing is, you know, there are stories like that about almost everything that you can run into in the woods. It really gives you a sense, a tip of the iceberg, a sense of the magic you can find in the natural world. That's what Roy could communicate. He, in the course of hanging around with Roy, he set my career compass at a very important time in my life. I have a lot to thank him for. He put me on a great career track. I ended up going outside of Wisconsin, working as a naturalist. I had a job for decades. I retired and came back to northeast Wisconsin. We moved to Algoma in 2010. And we were able to reconnect with Charlotte and Roy, and I am so thankful. This has been a wonderful return for us. We volunteer for the Door County Land Trust now, and we lead nature hikes from time to time. One of our first ones was in a place called Legacy. And it's a wonderful area where there's this panoramic view of Lake Michigan. It's a huge meadow. There's a woods down the hill a little bit, interesting stuff. You can imagine my enthusiasm when we took one of our very first tours we took out. And guess who showed up and joined our tour? Charlotte and Roy. I was floored. I'm the one who followed him around. Well, we walked on that hike, and at one point, Roy, we were passing a white cedar tree, and he stopped and he went like this, holding his lips together. I said, wait a minute. All of you know we have a very iconic naturalist, one of my favorite people. Roy, the floor is yours. Or should I say the soil? And he went on to tell a story about a white cedar and made everybody's day, especially mine. But I sent him a photograph one time. The spring weather was not great. Some of the flowers were struggling. The dwarf lake irises were rather tiny. So I put a penny next to the plant and took a photograph, and I emailed it to Roy. It's pretty small. I said, in fact, I think I discovered the rare pygmy dwarf lake iris. Within a very short time, I got an email back, capitalized, "That's a fake penny." He nailed it again. The ag researcher Wes Jackson, a wonderful person, researching how to grow food in a way that's earth-friendly. And I mean really, he uses the prairie as a model. Wes Jackson is a tremendous philosopher, farmer, agriculturist. He said, if your life's work can be accomplished in your lifetime, you are not thinking big enough. All the people, all of you in this room are a testimony, Roy. You were thinking big indeed. Your life's work goes on. I thank you.
Thank you, Dale. I'm going to ask everyone to hold applause until at least the end of our sections, just in the interest of time. Mike Grimm has worked with the Nature Conservancy as the conservation ecologist in northeast Wisconsin for many years. Many of you know him. Mike.
Thank you. I have to start off, actually, the quote from Wes Jackson that Dale just left you with was going to be the beginning of my presentation. And we need to confer, I guess, on the side before we speak. But thank you, Charlotte, for asking if I would like to say a few words here today. I didn't know, it first took me about a week to decide to do that. My relationship with Roy, I guess, was more professional at first, and with Roy, professional work also, you know, it evolves rapidly into sort of a friendship. And there are two things that I just wanted to talk about briefly, very briefly here. And it relates to his writings. He asked us to do two things, I think, in his writings. Maybe many more, but at least what I take are two things. One is to pay attention. You know, pay attention. Wake up. Look at what's around you. Through this attention, through the concentration of attention, that's the route to wisdom. And I think Roy knew we needed to be wise. We don't need to be clever. We need to be wise if we're going to really solve these challenges ahead of us. The other thing that Roy, I think, asked us to do, or at least spoke to me to do, and he didn't do this all the time in his articles, but when he did, it really made an impact. And those were the times that he talked about his early life in Kewaunee County. And I know we heard quite a bit about Kewaunee County this morning. A county with a lot of challenges, I suppose, today. But you could tell where his love came from. I mean, he wouldn't say, he wouldn't identify it exactly, but you knew he had that sort of familial land love, and it was generated out of his youth in Kewaunee County. I took a trip with Roy and Carl Schultz down to Kewaunee County many years ago, just as I suppose to reminisce for Roy and his, and he wanted to show us. He wanted to show us where he grew up, and it was great. It was a great day. I won't tell you all the bad jokes and there were a few, particularly from Carl. But anyway, what I gleaned from that, and I'm continually gleaning from that, and I worked through this for this comment today. It's not so much a connection between point A and point B. It's really a dissolution of those boundaries between A and B. It's not a connection between us and the land. It's really a dissolution of the boundary or the distinction between us and the land. And that's, I think, to me, one of the great messages that I work with and grapple with. You know, I constantly try to rework this in my mind and for my work and for my personal life. So, to conclude, and I am going to use Wes Jackson's quote again, even though Dale stole it from me. The comment about if you're working on something that you can complete in your lifetime, it's too small. And I think Roy, of course, knew that. what he's working on is to build awareness, build attention, but also build that kind of love that just subsumes any boundary between us and the rest of life here that we live with on Earth. So I will miss Roy, and I will miss that message. And thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Roger Coons, with a doctorate degree in economic geology, has worked throughout the globe on sustainable enterprises. He's a dedicated environmentalist and accomplished musician who shares many of Roy's values and interests.
Shar.
86 trips around the sun. 86 trips is pretty good. I miss my friend. I never got enough time in the field with Roy, through the forests and the fields and the rocky outcrops, because I always wanted more. Every walk led to the expectation of the next, and there were many, many years in between some of them. In the field, the common was celebrated, and the rare, wow, was that cherished. Every detail worth exploration. We got talking one afternoon, Roy and I, about sustainability, about the sphere of the environment and the sphere of the community and the sphere of the economy, about how we could see all of this in nature. And he flashed me that smile of his that we all know. You know, the one with no words? And I suddenly got this feeling that he had this all figured out before I could grow a beard. Roy got it on every scale, across many disciplines. It is not so much environmental stewardship, it's stewardship of the whole. During each season around the sun, stewardship is to be practiced to the highest achievable standards. This is something I learned from him. You know that Roy's sense of place was nature-centered, but from that center, he reached out to all of us, and he taught us about the valuable interlacing of our behaviors with nature, about the scale and impact of what we do with nature, about how we should be humble in the presence of nature. He told me one time, we were sitting there quietly watching some birds, and he said, "We are part of nature. And after all," and you can hear his voice, "well, it makes sense to me that we act like it." This is a pentamerid, 418 million years old. This is a touchstone for Roy and me. It is a time machine for Roy and me. I was giving a talk at the Ridges, and Roy and Shar were in the audience, and I think several people have said, we were stunned when Roy came to see what we were doing, because I always wanted to see what Roy was doing. And he had a bag with him. And I'm standing up there. Steve, you might remember this. And I'm about to launch into one of these things. And he got up and he walked up towards me and he handed me this bag, and it had about 40 pentamerids in it. This is like magic to a geologist, I'm telling you. He handed me one out of the bag, this very one, and I took it, and he took his other hand and he held them together for a moment. He said, "I know you know what this means. Time." I loved it when he left it hanging like that. Thank you, Shar, for being the co-pilot. And now the pilot. Thank you. I miss him.
Thanks, Roger. Ingrid Lorenz was a student of Roy's when he taught junior high school at the old Fish Creek School.
Hello, I am Ingrid Nelson Lorenz, and as Mitch said, I was in 7th grade when Roy was my science teacher. So I am one of those kids that Roy had hoped to influence, to be an influencer to my kids and to many others. Perhaps I was so young, or because he inspired something that was already in me, my world changed because of him. I was waiting, even unknown to myself, to have the fire lit, a passion for the natural world unveiled. His voice is always in my head. It is hard to care about nature if you don't know anything about it. It was a gift to me and to all of us. Rarely in our lives do we meet a person who changes our lives. I now see things others do not see. Mr. Lukes imparted to me his love and joy of the outdoors and the wonderment of it all. He never grew bored with creation. I continued to derive knowledge and joy from Mr. Lukes for over 45 plus years. Although I never remember stating his life goal, I got it. And Charlotte certainly helped me affirm it. He hoped to inspire people to observe nature, secondly, to study it, thirdly, to fall in love with it, then to share the passion with others, and fifthly, to seek to protect as much holy ground, pristine and precious land as you can, and pass on the message. I would say he walked with huge boots, but never left any footprints, except in our minds and hearts, and that is where the footprints remain. One time, my friend Julia and I were on a tour in Mud Lake during our college years. We were surprised to discover a field full of thousands of Indian paintbrushes. Mr. Lukes was shocked. He was in awe. We were all quiet at first, and Julie and I joined him in awe. Then, jumping for joy at the splendor, I remember hearing from Roy a lot of yikes and jeepers, a scene I will never forget, and neither would Mr. Lukes, as he wrote about it in one of his earliest books. Joy caught us by surprise. We all need joy in our lives. It's healing. I've continued to follow Mr. Lukes on tours, nature walks, slide presentations, and bird walks. I am not an early morning person, so to get up for a 5 a.m. bird hike required real devotion. I don't think anything other than a house fire would otherwise get me up at that horrible hour. Yet it was wonderful. Binoculars and field guide in hand, Mr. Lukes would have us carpool, different habitats, different birds. He could identify every bird song he heard. He would see in his telescope and binoculars this tiny little bird on a branch a great distance away. He knew its species, its song, even though it still had immature colors. I tried using my binoculars to focus on the bird, but never got further than seeing Mr. Lukes seeing the bird before it flew away. Mr. Lukes was a different kind of naturalist. He was a magical naturalist. I have been on many nature hikes across the country. They were mostly boring. just facts, not the joy, the awe, the wonderment, the tears. This was special knowledge. Roy possessed it and passed it on. Mr. Lukes heralded the goodness in all of nature for our eyes to see. He would take groups on nature hikes and have as many, preferably children, as necessary, join hands around very old and big trees to get their circumference and marvel at its age and wonder at what times in history it lived through. You could say Mr. Lukes was the original tree hugger. I tried to help friends and family when we would go on a hike or a walk and help them see what is around them. Usually they only would see green. But by now, a variety of friends and family have caught on. My heart rejoices. Nature found them ready. I remember when Mr. Lukes would get agitated when he saw unnecessary incursions of the land, large driveways, cleared land, big homes. I never heard Mr. Lukes swear, but I do remember a lot of huffing and puffing, and more huffing and puffing and mumbling, a habit I picked up myself, much to my family's chagrin. Besides changing my way of thinking, it caused me to become a slow hiker, eyes darting everywhere, trying not to miss a miracle of nature. Mr. Lukes influenced my writing, my art, my work. Copious framed photos of wildflowers, like family pictures, adorn my home. Rarely do we meet a person who has such an impact on our lives because they lived out their own passion. Mr. Lukes was such a good teacher. He had a little saying to help us remember things, like white pine, 5 needles, like in the word white. And hemlocks, they always stood out straight, just like the balsam, but you could tell them apart because hemlocks had stems and balsams didn't have stems. So just remember hem, stem, and then you can tell what a hemlock is. You had to see the holes in the leaves of the bellwort flower with your magnifying glass to identify it. Or smell a plant, even if it means getting down and dirty, because I typically fell on my face trying to smell the low to the ground harbinger of spring, the fragrant trailing arbutus. Listen at night to in the spring to the orchestra of spring peepers and the whippoorwills calling out its name repeatedly and getting an answer back and forth. And I can never make the sounds like Mr. Lukes did, but it was whippoorwill, 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 long into the night. I could sit there for hours. Spring would bring the white-throated sparrow. We knew he arrived because before we saw him by his call, which we were taught differently than the gentleman before me. He told us it was Old Sam Peabody, 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 Old Sam Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. And when I hear his song in the spring, I don't even think of it, that it's any other sound other than those words coming through the air. And then there's the rufous-sided towhee that looks a lot like a robin, but it distinguished itself from that near look-alike by singing, "Drink your tea, drink your tea." And not many school children, I think, learn these kind of lessons in science class. The ovenbird, an elusive bird, makes known her presence by singing, "Teacher, teacher, 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 teacher." It's so helpful because I'm kind of tone deaf that when you have these cues to be able to pick up on them. I learned to follow a calendar based on wildflowers blooming and migrating birds arriving. Keeping a diary helps. I learned this stuff as a kid, and I still remember it. Can't you just picture Mr. Lukes in your mind's eye? Circular glasses, casual dress, khaki-brimmed hat, always tilted to the side? May we hold that memory and remember what he stood for. It was at one of his events a few years ago I bought his photo of twin flowers. This gave me an opportunity to talk to him. I typically never wanted to bother him. He was such a busy man. He had a big warm smile for me and he said, "Oh yes, Ingrid, one of my best students." My heart was dearly warmed. I used the opportunity to thank him profusely and tell him how much I caught his love of nature. He had no narcissism about himself. He looked frail. I loved him. I felt an uncertain future for him. I felt blessed to have some closure with him. May we be grateful for him, emulate him, and pass his vision on and on, being glad he chose Door County to share his passion for the natural world in. Regularly, let us pick up our binoculars and go outside and warmly remember Roy Lukes.
Thank you, Ingrid. Susan Leader was also a student of Roy's and a friend at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship here in Door County.
September 1966. It was the first day of school. The rural schools in northern Door County were now consolidated into one district. I was entering 7th grade at the newly formed Fish Creek Junior High. My parents had told me about the new science teacher, who would also be my homeroom teacher, Mr. Roy Lukes. He was already known in the community for his work at the Ridges Sanctuary. On my way out the door for the bus, Dad said to me, "Pay attention, you might learn something from him." Well, despite my father's exhortations, as a 7th grader, I was more interested in making new friendships, passing notes in class, whispering in the back row, tossing objects in the aquarium, anything but listen to the teacher. And who among us would even dream of taking 30 or more 12-year-olds for a walk in the woods on a September morning? But Mr. Lukes did. Being a good educator, he had talked to us ahead of time, telling us what we might see and teaching us the terms for vegetation, birds, and signs of wildlife. I remember being very entertained with the name for a creature, turns out it was a bird, then called the rufous-sided towhee. Well, for some reason, my 7th grade brain found that name to be incredibly silly. Well, and I was in the morning science class, the first group to go out for morning walks in the school woods. I would lag behind on the walk back into school and leave notes for the afternoon class, which said things like, "Beware of towhee." Now, whether Mr. Lukes suspected it was I who left those notes, he never said. But I believe he was more concerned about the littering and, as a teacher, just grateful his student had learned at least one wildlife term. Of all the awful things he put up with that first year, the only time I recall Roy getting angry was when a few kids started teasing and making fun of Emma Toft. Somehow that crossed over the line of decency, and he really let them have it. By the end of the school year, our 7th grade class was to go on an all-day field trip. My father ended up being the chaperone. Roy and Dad found plenty to talk about on that long bus ride, the distraction of which pleased the rowdy 7th graders at the back of the bus, and Dad and Roy formed a lifelong friendship. Roy eventually brought his geology classes from the clearing to walk the stone fences on our old farm. Roy Lukes has been a household name in our home ever since. By 8th grade, science classes with Mr. Lukes captured my attention. Instead of passing notes, I was taking notes. Instead of whispering in the back of the room, I was delving into projects, finding items in our woods to identify, and more likely to be at the front of the bus for a winter day excursion to the deer yard at Tufts Point. Most of all, Mr. Lukes cultivated in us a sense of awe as realized in discovering a tiny flower in a dark, vacant November woods or spotting the first ephemerals of spring. As children, we did not fully appreciate the gifted educator we had before us. We didn't retain the knowledge he tried to impart, but Mr. Lukes planted the seeds of curiosity and watered those seeds with his contagious passion for all things wild and natural. So, today, 50 years later, it's with a grateful heart and a life enriched by his influence, I'm privileged to stand among those who honor the life and memory of Roy Lukes.
Thank you, Susan. Steve Leonard is the current director of the Ridges Sanctuary. As most of you know, Roy he inaugurated that position and held it for 27 years.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's been an incredibly humbling experience over the last several months as I have met with members, visitors, Door County, state officials, whoever walking the Ridges trails, telling stories about Roy and that personal interaction that they had on the trails at some point in their life. The Ridges is a place for learning. It will always be a place for learning, and that's because of Roy, and several years later because of Charlotte. It was their teachings, their writing, their programs that really made that personal connection to the natural world, out on the trails or throughout the peninsula. And I encourage everybody right now for 30 seconds, remember that one time that you had with Roy out on that trail. Remember that experience, and Roy will always be with you. As people have shared the stories, it's come across how incredible of a teacher he was. But as Brian Forrest put it yesterday too, he was also an incredible listener. He wanted to listen to everybody and their stories and trying to figure out what that one plant is or that one bird or whatever. Bob Rogotsky put it best too, is that we are all his students. And for that, we are eternally grateful to Roy and Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Wendy Lukes is a niece, daughter of one of Roy's brothers. She lives and works in Sturgeon Bay, has helped with the Christmas bird count for many years, and assumed the maintenance of that event when Charlotte relinquished that a few years ago.
I have frogs in my throat and butterflies in my tummy. This was stated by my Uncle Roy before some of his talks. It must run in the family. He spoke thousands of times, but still got a little nervous before each presentation. Roy was a simple, humble man and a wonderful, loving uncle. My daughter Jamie and I were visiting him over Mother's Day, and we asked him if he could be any bird, what would he want to be? And he said, "Let me think about that." He said, finally, a bluebird. The Lukes family gathered yesterday at the Ridges Range Light in Bailey's Harbor to share stories about Roy. As young children, we followed Roy through the Ridges Sanctuary, and he taught us to look at the spider weaving its web, or the lichen on a rock, or the scarlet tanager, which he called the black-winged redbird. Cousins, nieces, nephews learned to notice the natural world, maybe more than most, with Uncle Roy's teachings. Birds will sing louder, bullfrogs will croak with a little more bass, and wildflowers will be more colorful because my Uncle Roy will be orchestrating from above. When you hear the song of a bluebird, see the massive cottonwood by the Institute Saloon, or taste the wintergreen berry, think of my Uncle Roy. I am sure Emma Tuft, greeted Uncle Roy with open arms, and told him what a great influence he had on others. In the past few weeks, I've been filling Ziploc bags with sunflower seed, 1,000 to be exact. The sticker reads, "Take a look around you," in memory of Roy Lukes, which is what my Uncle Roy taught people to do. Be sure to pick one up on your way out today. Take a look around you, or you just might miss something wonderful. We love you, and we will miss you greatly, Uncle Roy.
Thank you, Wendy. Off script, I feel obliged to thank the entire audience for your endurance. I think it's well-deserved here for Roy. Now we will interrupt the personal messages that people are sharing with an 8-minute clip of a recently produced video that involves Roy.
Roy Lukes is a homegrown Wisconsin talent that is taught in many Door County schools and Nature's Classroom. The Kewanee High School graduate has had over 2,500 articles published, and his images of Door County's habitat has provided an education for countless people.
I started in, I think, October of 1968. And I got the idea for these stories, and I went in to chat with Chan Harris one day, who was the editor of The Advocate in Sturgeon Bay. And I said, what do you think of me doing a weekly story for The Advocate on nature? He says, it's not a bad idea. Let's give it a try for a couple of weeks and see how it goes.
Roy's weekly stories have become a part of the Door County culture. But he did not establish his legacy alone. It was during the summer of 1971 that he developed his best story. Roy was living at the Ridges Lighthouse in Bailey's Harbor, working as a naturalist at the Ridges Sanctuary. Some days his work was educational in nature, some days the work was manual labor. On this day, a chance encounter with a young lady from Milwaukee on the trails blossomed into a relationship that has lasted for over 4 decades.
His job that day was building bridges. He was nailing decking on one of the far bridges. So he had his paint-stained jeans or pants on. He had his old army shirt that he had cut the sleeves off and the strings were hanging, and his hat that had paint stain. The knees were out on his jeans, but paint on his hat. That's how we met. Eventually, we got to be friends. And on New Year's, he invited me up for New Year's weekend. We watched the Rose Bowl parade, and he said, wouldn't it be great if you lived up here all year round? And I said, where, the Nelson Motel? That was the only motel open in the winter. He said, no, here at the Range Light. I said, yeah, but won't the neighbors talk? And that's when he asked me to marry him on New Year's Day, 1972.
The relationship bloomed into a great partnership in all aspects of their life. Charlotte helped Roy with his work with the Ridges Sanctuary, along with his writing, and Roy helped Charlotte with her mushroom research.
It took me a while to get in the groove, but I did help with Ridges stuff pretty much right away, you know, with newsletters and things like that. And I realized, just being with Roy out in the Ridges all summer, that he knew just about everything. He knew trees, and he knew a lot about insects and flowers and birds and animals. And I finally found something that he wasn't quite as knowledgeable about, and that was the mushrooms. So I decided to use that as my key nature study.
Charlotte has identified over 600 types of different mushrooms in Door County for her nature study, while Roy provides the beautiful imagery. Over the years, the trips to find mushrooms have yielded just as many unique stories.
Anytime we're in the woods with them, someone's like, "Oh, Roy, hey, I have to ask you a question." It doesn't matter where we are, who we're with, somebody knows him anywhere, and he's so gracious and will always stop and explain and talk and make sure they know the correct terms or what they're asking about, and he's the teacher still. He'll always be the teacher. In fact, I call him Sensei, because he's my teacher, he's my life teacher.
Their marriage to each other, their work, and the environment is dedication at its finest. Roy, with the help of Charlotte, has written 5 nature-inspired books and published thousands of articles for Door County publications like the Peninsula Pulse.
Even before he was doing his stories on computer, when we had an IBM Selectric, and he would type up the stories and I would proofread them. And now with his stories with the Pulse that he writes on the computer, I do the proofreading, and then we work at choosing which photos are best to go with the story. And with the Door County Living magazine, the same thing. He writes it and I proofread it, and then we pick out the best pictures. And then I use Photoshop to adjust the pictures.
She's much better at technology than I am, but we make a lot of use of the computer. The number of images I've taken, thousands, I don't know. But we have them categorized by subject very nicely. Charlotte does a marvelous job of that, so we can find these images quite easily.
I can't imagine coming, being able to do that week after week and be so creative and so enlightening. It's just amazing. They're such a special couple.
It's just so fortunate that Roy had this wonderful talent of doing these weekly letters for the local newspapers, these nature notes, and our Charlotte has been such a help to him to get them sped through, get all the writing done and corrections, and she's just been so wonderful herself. I'm amazed with her background as a dental assistant, how she's locked on to nature and how she knows it so well. And they're just a great partnership, and they just have this wonderful affection for all facets of nature.
The couple has always shied away from the spotlight, but in the fall of 2014, their work was recognized on a grand level. The couple received a well-deserved Lifetime Achievement Award from Wisconsin's Alliance for Land Trust.
We are just so grateful to be awarded for doing something that we love to do. And Roy flunked retirement, so he's going to continue writing. He's been writing weekly nature stories for Door County newspapers for 46 years. And it's just, when you study nature, you never stop learning. You're always exploring and discovering new things. So we're very thankful, and thank you all for coming out tonight.
I thought it was an overwhelming event, and the thing that impressed me was knowing that so many other people out there in the audience were doing just as Charlotte and I have been trying to do for so many years too. Just preserving the land and working hard to keep it in good shape and being good stewards and teaching others to do the same. And to preserve a lot of these areas takes a lot of effort and a lot of people. And we feel we're just a small part of it.
Thank you. That video clip was produced by Dean Leisgang and Eileen Littig from UW Green Bay. Now moving on, Gretchen Mehring is a longtime close friend, fellow birder, and nature lover.
I met Roy in the late 60s. We had gone on many hikes on the ridges, and like everyone I knew, we had fallen into the spell of this charismatic man. The Historical Society from my hometown was planning a trip to Door County, and my mother asked me to arrange a program to be given by Roy at the Old Eagle Inn in Ephraim. Of course, he instantly agreed, and I asked him if it was okay with him to invite Bill Beckstrom, another Door County icon and the best botanist I ever knew. Fine with Roy, it showed this generous side of his great nature. His slideshow that afternoon, of course, was breathtaking. Since then, our friendship grew, and along with that, the awesome realization that here was a rare kind of human being. He was indeed a born naturalist, enthralled by the world that surrounded him, always ready to learn, record what he learned, and share it with whomever would listen. John and I had a breakfast club with Bob and Charlotte Yeomans, Aggie and Ted Kubitz, Charlotte and Roy, that met once a month, year-round. At every gathering, usually at the White Gull Inn or the Viking, Roy would come armed with something new to reveal to us. A story about snowflakes, the measurement of a tree, the discovery of a rare fern on Washington Island, and we always left our get-togethers informed about something wonderful that made our world so very special. Roy procured, on starry nights, he set up his telescope on Junction Road, showing us heavenly displays we otherwise would have missed. We all gathered on the Mink River Road at dusk to hear the mating call of the woodcock, or kneeled on the moist spring earth, inhaling the wonderful scent of the trailing arbutus. We watched him back into a water-filled ditch on the road to Mud Lake. So locked in was he with a bird call he wanted us to experience. He dragged himself out of the water, laughed, and on we went, watching for and listening to the birds on that very early morning hike. One time, our breakfast club went to Kewanee on a pilgrimage to the area where Roy grew up. We saw his dad's barber shop, had breakfast at the hotel around the corner, went to Sloven and other places where he and his cousin Buzz Badodny, who went on to become the secretary of the Wisconsin DNR, learned to love the natural world. And we listened to this articulate man talk about the influences in his life that shaped his personality. We shared Christmas and holiday feasts full of good talk and friendship. And we sang together in the Peninsula Chamber Singers. Not only did Roy play the trumpet, but he had an above-average baritone voice. One year, my mother gave the gift of a class Roy was giving at Bjorklanden to my twin brother's son, John Wilterding. John, a science student at UW Stevens Point, was already on his chosen path, entomology, with emphasis on butterflies and moths. Roy and he instantly bonded. Roy procured 3 summers of internships so John could gather, identify, and collect and collate butterflies and moths and other bugs of Door County to have as a teaching tool at the ridges. John went on to earn his PhD with distinction, and on one of his summer treks gathering specimens, he discovered a new moth in the southwestern part of our country. In the science world, the person who discovers a new specimen gives it a name within that genus. John named the moth Spraguei lukesi in honor of his mentor. We had a party at our house so John could surprise Roy with a photo of the moth and read him the scientific specifications. Roy jumped up on his feet, flabbergasted, and at the same time modestly accepted this gift. He also knew that our daughter Nancy was a science teacher in the UP. He shared fossils with her and answered many emails with great good humor. This is the man we all know and love. He studied nature, he studied Door County, and then he shared that prodigious knowledge with us all. As I sat with him for a while this spring while Charlotte checked the bluebird trail, we visited on and off between the cat naps he took. When I left, I leaned over him to say goodbye, and he said, "I love you, Gretchen." And I said, "I love you too, Roy." After all, who could not love this very special man?
Thank you, Gretchen. Max Martin works at the Peninsula Agriculture Center with the World Potato Germ Bank. He has helped with grass mowing and snow plowing, as well as many other chores at the Lukes home recently while Roy's health declined.
Since I have been mistaken for Roy's son, I thought I should say a few words at this celebration of his life. When our son Hans was a youngster, he was able to spend time, some summer days, volunteering for the Door County Land Trust with Roy and many of you here. Roy told tales of hiking Isle Royal in his 20s and encountering a grad student named David Meach, who was studying wolves and would later become a world-renowned wolf researcher. Thanks to Roy for planting the seeds of stewardship and love of nature, Hans, in his 20s, went on to get his master's degree under that same Dr. Meach, and then was able to tell Roy of his adventures in wolf research. There was such excitement when Roy and Hans swapped stories. Roy and Charlotte, Charlotte and Roy. Roy might say they had a symbiotic relationship, growing together with each one benefiting. Thank you, Charlotte, for always being there to help Roy be the best he could be. Now I would like to read a letter on behalf of Link and Florence McGurk, Roy's dear Door County friends who now reside in Florida. Oh, for those of you who know Lincoln's stature, maybe I should try to be in character. In the 1970s, when Florence and I were driving to Door County from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, whenever we could, one of our dreams was someday to meet the famous Roy Lukes. Our dream came true in 1981 at a fundraiser for the Scand at Al Johnson's, when we were seated at a 4-person table with Roy and Charlotte. The lifelong friendship that started that day is one of our greatest treasures. We shared good food and bad puns, learned and immediately forgot the Latin names of countless plants and mushrooms. We relived his boyhood in the hills and rivers around Kewanee, held his coat while he got down on all fours to photograph almost invisible flowers, and always, always were awed by his knowledge, his patience, and his kindness, and his modesty. Roy was good at so many things. He can make a conch shell sound like a golden trumpet, and a trumpet sound like the voice of an angel. Every time I start the Johnny Appleseed prayer on the wrong note, I wish Roy were there to fix it. The world can ill afford to lose any good people. Roy's passing leaves us short. He was above all a good man, a man who cannot be replaced. All we can do to honor him is try to live up to the standards he set.
Thank you, Max. Carl Schultz is an icon in Door County as a prior superintendent at Sevastopol Schools, founder of The Farm Family Center in Sturgeon Bay, and was on the Ridges Sanctuary Board for many years.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Appropriately, Ruth and I were awakened this morning by the calls of the most common bird, the crow, and the drumming of the most impressive, the pileated woodpecker. Roy wore many hats. One of those was that of being the premier ornithologist in Door County. For 60 years, Roy has been my mentor, colleague, and a very loyal friend. Roy, someone mentioned a walking stick earlier. Roy had a walking stick made out of white cedar, something like this. White cedar, arborvitae, the tree of life. This one is famous too. It was Emma Toff's. We enjoyed many excursions together. The most memorable was in 1971. That was BC, before Charlotte. I mentioned that because in a photo that Roy took, Charlotte was not in it. It was 1971. Roy, Miss Emma, Ruth, and I went to see the world's largest white pine near Newell, Wisconsin. The tree was magnificent. It was the only time Miss Emma had ever had to have her picture taken. Roy frequently used the photos from that day. Have any of you seen that photo of Miss Emma standing in front of the MacArthur pine at Newell? Some of you have. A number of publications had used it. Later that day, Roy's enthusiasm was infectious. I should mention that both he and Emma had never seen a gray jay or a boreal chickadee. Roy's enthusiasm was infectious when he spotted a gray jay and a boreal chickadee in a balsam tree. Indisputably, Roy inspired, informed, and excited more persons than any other naturalist. His precious legacy as an excellent teacher, writer, and photographer of our natural world will certainly be passed down for generations. He has enhanced all of our lives.
Thank you, Carl. Clint Seeley has helped with Christmas bird counts for many years.
My wife, Gwen, and I became acquainted with Roy the way so many of you and so many of Door County residents in general became acquainted with him. Through his column in The Advocate, or to give one of the more local pronunciations, advocate. Week in and week out, whether we were here in Door County or back in Chicago, Roy's words and his exquisite photos came to us via the newspaper. My wife, more bold than I, eventually reached out to Roy and Charlotte the way many have done, by writing to them about a bird-related issue. And they graciously, patiently answered always. As we got to know Roy and Charlotte better, we socialized with them on occasion. Roy told us of growing up in Kewanee, and Joel Blahnik can correct any falsehoods that I'm perpetrating here. But growing up in Kewanee and living 3 doors down from the Blahnik family. And if I remember rightly, which may or may not be the case, the Blahniks were in and of themselves a fully fledged, to use an avian metaphor, polka band. They, Roy told us, would practice in their backyard nightly when the weather permitted. Roy, a young lad at the time, would be upstairs in his house. Joel mentions that he was on the porch. I recall him telling me he was upstairs, a young lad, windows open, listening to the music coming from the nearby backyard of the Blahniks. I don't know if Roy had taken up the trumpet by this time, but eventually he did become a trumpeter and even played professionally with a polka band. He never said how much money he made, or if any money at all. He may have been paid in brats and beer, for all I know. But he did have one tape recording of the band that he played with, and he himself performing as second trumpet. That tape he played for Gwen and me at least twice on 2 separate occasions, maybe 3 times. And there came a moment when he would call our attention to a particular passage. There he was, in all his glory, the second trumpet, coming through loud and clear. I remember vividly one of the times when he played that tape. It may have been the second time, or maybe the third, or maybe even a 4th time. We, and there were other guests, had been invited to Charlotte and Roy's for a meal. In the midst of the music, Charlotte called us all into the dining room. The meal was ready. We, responding, went into the next room and took our seats. Roy sat at the head of the table, his back to the old restored cook stove, on the other side of which was the living room we had just left, where the tape polka music could yet be heard. We all know what air guitar looks like, when a singer or some wannabe rocker pretends to play an imaginary electric guitar. I can see Roy in my mind's eye as clearly as if it were happening right here today. Before any actual partaking of food began, Roy, with that slightly impish smile on his face, which we all know so well, raised his right hand to about 8 inches or so directly in front of his nose and began to play his version of the air trumpet. And he said, without equivocation, I can remember fingering to this very day. I believed him implicitly then and now. Anyone who could retain in memory all the names, both common and scientific, of all those birds and plants and insects, and everyone here knows he could do just that, any man with such a memory would have no problem remembering the fingering of several lines of polka music. It was only after the tape music in the other room had come to an end and Roy had put down his air trumpet that he reached out to either side and we all joined hands around the table to sing the Johnny Appleseed Song of Grace. We then set about eating the excellent meal Charlotte had prepared, with Roy's music still ringing in our ears. And to bring my comments full circle and back to birds, I recall the time that I was on the Christmas bird count, the second day of which is always in Southern Door, wonderfully arranged by Charlotte and now Wendy. I had the privilege of riding in Roy's van. There were many others so privileged over the years, such as, and all of them are here today, of those that I'm naming, Nick Anderson, Mike Madden, Peter Wolter. Our designated lunch stop that day was a beer and burger place in Forestville. As we left Roy's van and headed toward the restaurant, he pointed to a fairly nondescript building on the other side of the Forestville main road and commented that it was there, in that hall, that he had played his trumpet professionally for a polka party. Birds and polka bands go well together, and we're just 2 facets of the multifaceted and much beloved Roy Lukes.
Thank you, Clint. Tim Stone is a great supporter of many environmental organizations and issues in Door County. In his customary, gracious, and generous manner, he and his wife have arranged to videotape this ceremony, making it available for those who can't be here today.
Good afternoon, Charlotte. On a lighter note, how many of you have ever met anybody as well scrubbed as Roy was? He just looked freshly scrubbed anytime you saw him. Sue and I purchased our little slice of heaven on Mud Bay in August of 1980. To this day, we pinch ourselves for our great fortune. The Ridges Sanctuary forms our back property line. It wasn't long before we met Roy and Charlotte and became life members of the Ridges. Ever since then, we attended as many hikes and lectures by Roy and Charlotte as we could. What a team they made. In 2014, Roy Thilley and I nominated Roy and Charlotte as Conservationists of the Year with Gathering Waters, Wisconsin's Alliance for Land Trusts. Instead, Gathering Waters honored Roy and Charlotte with an even more prestigious honor, the Harold Budd Jordan Lifetime Achievement Award, which you saw in the video. This fall, and Bruce, I'm going to answer what you suggested in the first talk. This fall, Roy and I are going to nominate Roy and Charlotte for the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame to join the likes of Aldo Leopold, John Muir, and Gaylord Nelson. If any of you have statewide or nationwide connections that you would wish to write a letter of support, please see me in the lobby after the celebration. We don't want to overwhelm the board of the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, but we would sure want to give it the best possible shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Tom Sutter is an attorney in Appleton. We heard his wife, Janet, play the violin earlier. Roy and Charlotte stood up at Janet and Tom's wedding more than 26 years ago. Tom was also instrumental in displaying Roy's photography at his Appleton gallery.
Thank you. Before I speak, and then followed by Charlotte and the Washington Post March, can I invite all of you just to stand for a few seconds and just stretch, please? All right, if you'll be seated. Roy admired Rachel Carson, the naturalist and the author of Silent Spring. Rachel Carson spent what would be her final summer in Maine, hoping for more time to say all the things she wanted to say, but knowing it was an ephemeral hope. She planned a book on evolutionary biology, but most of all, she wanted to expand her 1956 article, Help Your Child to Wonder, into a book on the value and necessity of a sense of wonder in the modern world. Although she rarely spoke of her illness, she was able to write about death through her understanding of the rhythms, enduring cycles, and patterns of the natural world. The following letter, written to her friend Dorothy Freeman, after the two had spent a sunlit morning at Nawagan, one of their favorite places along the shore of the Sheepscot, was intended to acknowledge her approaching death and to comfort her friend. Rachel Carson died at her home in Maryland of cancer and heart disease on April 14th, 1964, at the age of 56. And this is what she wrote to her friend. Dear one, this is a postscript to our morning at Nawagan, something I think I can write better than say. For me, it was one of the loveliest of the summer's hours, and all the details will remain in my memory. That blue September sky, the sounds of wind in the spruces and surf on the rocks, the gulls busy with their foraging, alighting with deliberate grace, the distant views of Griffith's Head and Todd Point, today so clearly etched, though once half seen in swirling fog. But most of all, I shall remember the monarchs, that unhurried westward drift of one small winged form after another, each drawn by some invisible force. We talked a lot about their migration, their life history. Did they return? We thought not. For most, at least, this was the closing journey of their lives. But it occurred to me this afternoon, remembering, that it had been a happy spectacle, that we had felt no sadness when we spoke of the fact that there would be no return. And rightly, for when any living thing has come to the end of its life cycle, we accept that end as normal. For the monarch, that cycle is measured in known span of months. For ourselves, the measure is something else, the span of which we cannot know. But the thought is the same. When that intangible cycle has run its course, it is a natural and not unhappy thing when a life comes to its end. That is what those brightly fluttering bits of life taught me this morning. I found a deep happiness in it, so I hope may you. Thank you for this morning. And thank you, Roy, for all that you did to touch and enrich our lives and to help us all cultivate our own sense of wonder.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now Charlotte will say a few words, and that will be followed by our conclusion with a Peninsula Music Festival brass quintet plus percussion performing the Washington Post March by John Philip Sousa. Charlotte.
Thank you to everyone who participated, volunteered, and came today. I really appreciate it. And we thank you, too, for the support of all the cards and letters that we've gotten. One letter that came the day after Roy left me was especially moving. It said, "Dear Roy, although we've never met, nor have I ever written, you've been a happy part of my life for many, many years. I am one of the multitude of loyal readers who look forward to reading your amazing columns every week. You have given me an appreciation of nature that I never knew I had. I've learned so much from you. I often cut out your columns and mail them to friends and family around the country, sharing the info and your wisdom. Oh, and your photos. So many awesome photos. You've even inspired me to get a camera and to try to capture the natural beauty all around us in the world. This card shows a sunrise I took last fall near our place on South Lake Michigan Drive in Sturgeon Bay. Anyway, this card is just to say thank you for continuing to enrich my life in so many ways. You are probably one of the greatest teachers I have ever had." And this is somebody we had never met. But just I also wish to thank the staff of the auditorium and the Peninsula Music Festival, which is, they've just completed 1 week, they have 2 more weeks to go, and the musicians have donated their time to present this wonderful music. Thank you.